am I really making an impact? Am I really making a difference? What if tomorrow I was to stop my work and disappear altogether? Would that change anything?
Sometimes I think we get overwhelmed when we reach that space where we think that there is no way out. We're backed into a corner.
People just assume that someone else's situation is going to be the same as theirs, that everyone is seeing the world through their own lens instead of, reflecting and just taking the time to understand the other perspective.
It doesn't really matter who you are, where you are, what you do, but just actually giving yourself the opportunity to be kind to yourself and then just to slow down and recognize what you have done, feel more so than what you haven't done. So important, right?
This is Let's Pay Attention, Hacking Consciousness. I'm Cathy Dimarchos. Let's explore what it means to lead, live, and listen with intention.
Well, hello everyone, and welcome to Let's Pay Attention. This morning's guest is somebody who is really special to me, and you'll actually begin to understand why. Let me just read her bio and then let me give you a little bit more insight. So today you're going to meet Adelaide. Adelaide is actually a purpose-driven leader. She actually has more than 15 years experience, working with organizations and helping them grow, bring clarity and integrity, and most importantly, impact into what they actually do. She was born in France. She's actually lived in Norway, in Spain, and of course is now in Australia. She actually brings with that a global mindset, and her work, is actually across business, technology, and professional services. She is known for building strong, aligned teams and for turning complex challenges into practical, human-centered solutions. Through senior leadership roles and in her business, Lumens Digital, Addie actually supports organizations that actually want to do genuinely good work and to do it well. She's a mother of two young boys, and she's actually passionate about feminism, ethical leadership, and cutting through the noise to actually create real change. And I tell you why it's so important. I've known Adelaide for maybe about 6 years now. And what I've just shared about her, that is genuine. The way that she actually looks at things and is able to give you clarity that cuts through noise, that actually really showcases who you are as a person, is genuinely a skill set that she has. I mean, Adelaide actually knows how to speak Cathy language. So please actually welcome as my next guest, Adelaide.
Hello. Hello, thank you for that kind introduction. Yes, it's been 6 years already.
A wonderful 6 years that has actually kept me sane.
Me, not always.
Well, yes, I'm sorry. So I think, Adelaide, you actually bring a really different perspective, particularly when it comes to marketing and what would traditionally actually be, in my words, noise out in the media. And I think one of the things that I love about the way that you actually deliver and see things, it is genuinely with ethics, with consciousness, integrity. And I think that that's a really important area to actually cover, particularly in today's world. So I'm going to actually ask you maybe to open up by sharing, first of all, how did you land to actually have that sort of a baseline and a framework?
Yes, so it's interesting because a lot of people come to marketing because they want to do the creative, all that arty things, or for newer generation, they probably come to marketing because of what they see on social media and they want to replicate that. I came to marketing because of the analytical, the data side of things, and because I wanted to understand the human behind it, the psychology of it. I think that's what was at the core of what I wanted to do and the reason why I wanted to get into marketing. What make people tick, really understand the human behind it. And that has sort of driven how I grew my career, my roles, how I chose which companies I wanted to work for and with as well in my career. So it came to a point where sometimes if you do work in the marketing space, it can feel like fluff, like noise. Like, am I really making an impact? Am I really making a difference? What if tomorrow I was to stop my work and disappear altogether? Would that change anything? And it came into a point when I was working, especially with some companies that, to be fair, they had an impact, they were important in their own role, but I didn't feel that connection. I didn't feel that sense of purpose. And that was a really big thing for me. And I think that's why I started Lumens Digital about 6 years ago, to be able to pick the people I was working with and really focus on those smaller size businesses, people that I knew I would make a difference for. That was very important. And then when it came to full-time employment, same. I had some companies where I felt really quickly that it just wouldn't work because they didn't really have a mission aside of selling, which, is all well and good and good for them, but it's not the way I work. And I think you can always do a much better job when you have that sense of purpose within you.
I think that actually leads into, I guess, being able to understand boundaries, because that plays such a big role. And in marketing, it may actually either make or break you, especially when you're so clear around your purpose and what it is that you actually want to contribute to. So what would you say around that in respect to how people who are specifically in marketing, how would you navigate through, your own sense of self and what you're actually doing for an organization?
I think it can be really hard, especially for people that are maybe more early on in their careers, but not always. Sometimes, you get lost in the swing of things and you forget that self, you forget yourself, you forget what you stand for and what really makes you tick. And being able to say no to either companies, like I know that as Lumens, there's some clients that I had to part ways with because it just wasn't working. There was no alignment. I had to put those boundaries. And, when you run your own business, it can be really hard to fire a client in a way, because when you're small, it can make the difference. Any bit of revenue can make a difference when you're just starting, and having to say no to a client and put those boundaries in place can be really hard. But it's about understanding that that's taking your time, your energy, and that's taking the space that could be used for something else. And, sometimes it's not about saying no to one thing. It's just opening the doors for better things and different things. And it can be a bit confronting, I'd say, to get to that point. But it's so important. And that stands as well when you're employed by a company. Sometimes it's about the direction that the company is taking. And, it's hard sometimes to have to maybe leave a company that you no longer align with, make that choice, or just being able to stand to your manager and say, well, actually, I don't believe this is the right direction. This is not what we stand for. This is not the way I believe in things, and stand your ground. But it's so important because I found that more often than not, people are willing to listen. They just need someone that, people they're like the little cogs, and they turn. And if no one's put the finger in, to be like, wait, let's stop. Let's reflect why we're doing this. Is it really what we stand for? Is it really where we want to go? And make people pause and reflect on things. Then nothing happens. Whereas if you put that stop, usually, sometimes people are even grateful that someone actually did that and took that time.
So you're talking to courage, and I think this is something that you and I, really actually align with, in that if it really doesn't resonate and if it doesn't feel right, then it is actually having that voice. And sometimes it is lonely, to have that voice. Being a female, and I guess I want to touch on that because I guess there are a lot of females in marketing.
Yes.
And so they will be listening to this and likely actually saying, well, it's easy for you ladies to actually say that.
Yes, that's true. There are a lot of women in marketing, and there are quite a few men as well. But I found the men are usually, tend to be louder, tend to be more confident, at least in appearance. And, that's not really surprising. I mean, it's the same in many other areas of business and life, I'd say. But yeah, it is harder. It is harder for us to take a seat at the table, to lean in, to get that voice and listen. But if we don't do it, then no one's going to do it for us. That's at the end of the day, that all it comes back to. And it also depends on why we're doing it. And I think when you're clear on your why, when you're clear on your own purpose, everything becomes easier. It's because then, that what's the worst that can happen? It says, they say, no, it doesn't work. Well, it's already not working because you already feel that disconnect. So if it's already not working, what's the worst that can happen?
Well, let's explore that, because I think that a lot of people will catastrophize, especially in the current economic situation. People are actually feeling the uncertainty. And so being able to actually have that, I'm going to say opportunity, because it is opportunity to stand up and to share your opinion and to actually, be able to walk away and sleep at night. I think that's one thing that I, often think about. At least I can sleep at night because the decisions that I've actually made actually align with my values. So with that underlying fear or concern that, yes, I can actually stand up and I am going to stand up for myself, it's still going to actually be a blocker. So in your experience, when did you first find that voice where you went, no, enough is enough?
I think it's about having a plan. I'm not saying, something bothers you, wake up tomorrow, walk up to your boss and say, do this or I quit. Like that is not. And I would argue that there are not many people in the world that would be in a position to do that. But it's about having a plan. It's about, okay, I'm going to go and put that this. If it goes well, good. If it doesn't go well, what are my pathways? I can stay a bit longer and work on this. Can I maybe start looking but not do anything? It's about having that plan in place that makes a difference. Because yes, I would not be able to just quit and hit the road and see what happens. I don't think my anxiety could deal with that. Even when I started Lumens and I decided to go full time, because as you know, Cathy, originally started as a side hustle, something I was doing on the side that I started during COVID because I was not stood down but on reduced hours. So I had that free time to develop. And at some point, it got to that point, it's not working that way. I need more time. So I can either talk to my current boss and say, can we rework my hours? Can we work on something together so I can stay with you, but also grow my business and do my thing? It wasn't the case for them. That was not an option for them. I was like, okay, well then, by then I was like, okay, well, if that's not working, if I want to go full time, what does that look like? What clients do I have already? Who am I working with? How could I get more? How much do I need to live? Working through that plan, know your numbers. I think it's something that you've talked a lot, Cathy, and I've definitely learned a lot from you on that. But, know your numbers, put your budgets together, your personal budgets, your business budget. What do you need? Tax and super and all the things, factor everything in so that you get a clear picture. Because that, I did say that I came to marketing from data, like obviously a very big data person. And I find that when you have that data, when it's all written down and you can see it, then you get that reassurance that allows you to find your voice. So that's definitely one of the things. And for me, another thing that was a big change was when I became a mom, that suddenly your life takes a whole other dimension. And it's no longer about you actually almost take the backseat in your own life because you've got that little person that relies on you for everything. And it's a big job to shape a human being, to shape their values, to shape how they see life. And, then you start to reflect on what's important to you, what you want to pass on to them, how you would like to approach life. And, I think that does help you set boundaries because all of a sudden they're the most important things. And, so you need to make calls because it's no longer just about you. It's about the bigger picture. It's about that. And that obviously has been a massive catalyst, I'd say, for me.
As I'm listening to you, you've said a few things, and sometimes I think we get overwhelmed when we reach that space where we think that there's no way out. We're backed into a corner. But what you've actually identified is, first of all, plan, think about what else you can actually do. Never to place yourself in a position where security is no longer there for you, The second thing that actually, in identifying your actual boundaries, what you're also actually doing is giving yourself choice. And so I think what you've actually articulated is the difference in the way that you have approached this. You've been very specific about what you want it to look like. And then as a result of choice, what you've then done is given yourself freedom.
Yeah, absolutely. But that freedom comes from having a plan. You need to plan for freedom. Freedom doesn't just happen. We talk a lot about at the moment financial freedom and all of those things. Unless you win the lottery, which, amazing, but not that many people have that luck. Unless you do that, it comes from planning and putting things in place bit by bit to get there. Nothing just arrives like that, all done and sorted for you. You need to go through that work of planning, of looking at what's important to you. What do you want your life to look like now, in 5 years, in 10 years? Times go very quickly. Some things I've also realized with having kids, it really does fly. And if you don't have that plan, you blink and suddenly you wake up on the other side of things and nothing looks the way you would have wanted it to. So sure, some of us come from more privilege than others. Unfortunately, we don't all have the same start in life. And I think that's not something that we can dismiss. But there are things that we can act on. And everything that is within our power, within our remit, I think we should try and influence so that it ends up in alignment with who we are and who we want to be.
You've actually identified some things that I think we tend to miss in the process. The one thing that I do know and love about you is that being so methodical, and actually giving yourself the opportunity and the time to actually think things through. And sometimes people get stuck, because they go straight into the how without actually saying, well, let's just actually go back to what you actually said right originally. Why? Why is it that you're actually making the choices to change? And then what do you actually want to change? What do you need? All of those things actually play out. And I think, if anybody's actually listening, it's to identify that there's a process. We all look to the external world and see things, but what we see isn't necessarily what's happened in the background.
Absolutely. And I think why is a question we should be asking more. My 4-year-old is very good at this. Why? I hear that question about 1 million times a day. But, maybe there's something to learn from that. I think more of us should ask ourselves why on many things. Why are we doing what we do? Why am I reacting the way I react? Why is this content that I see online making me angry? Why do I want to change this as my life? Why, like 1st of January, making new resolutions. Why am I doing this? And I think if we were asking ourselves why, we would probably follow through way more, because then, when you cling to a purpose, it's more important. So I think every decision that we make, we should really start considering that why.
There will be many, I guess, parents who are listening to this. And sometimes we actually forget that when that actual season in our lives change to actually bring, another human into the world, we don't anticipate, I'm going to say, the depth of what is actually involved. Or we have external pressures in actually still maintaining the life, that we had before. What are some of the things that you've learned along the way? Particularly, the difference with the first child to the second child?
I think so many. I remember the first one, it was like in those first few weeks after the birth. And, it wasn't unplanned. Both my kids are IVF, so very much planned. There was very much of a process to get there. I knew what was happening. I think I knew the concept of what was happening. I don't think you can really understand until you're in it, because those first few weeks after he's born, I remember one day being like, oh my God, what have I done? My whole life has changed. And there's no weekend, there's no night off, there's no holidays. Like, you're a parent 24/7 for the rest of your life. There is no, even, you can take a break and go away, but you will still be a parent. That is not going away. Once you're in it, you're in it. That was, I think, a tsunami that just came for me when that realization hit. So that was a very, very big thing. And then, you do need to let go, which is really hard, of your past self and just start discovering that new identity that is being shaped. Because there is a before and an after. I think everyone that says that, no, it's exactly the same, that is, no, I don't believe that. There is, it's been proven even biologically that we are not the same people, that our brains are impacted. You are a different person. So I think you need to give yourself some grace and get to know that person. Get to know yourself. You don't know yourself anymore. You don't know that new person, that new identity. So you need to take the time. Your child is a brand new person that you didn't know a day before. You are a new person that you didn't know a day before. So take the time, just accept it and, get to know that. What does that look like? Of your values might have changed. How they change? How that impacting what you're doing? Like all of those things. And they do say, especially for mothers, a lot of us, we plan whether we want or don't want to go back to work, in which time frame. And I'd say for most people, the reality doesn't end up aligning with what you were planning. Some people want a long time off and then they realize that, no, actually they need to get back to work. That was me. That was definitely me. And it does come with a level of guilt. But I knew that for me, I was a better mom for my child by having that time and by having that time as me, as a professional, and having that cut. And that was the best version of me. And my child deserved the best version of me. For others, it might be the opposite. They might have been very career-driven before, and they found that when their child is here, everything has changed. And suddenly that's not their primary focus anymore. And that's also absolutely fine, as long as it comes from that sense of awareness and deep purpose.
Yeah, I think, that actual level of consciousness about who you are, who you now are, versus who you were. And as you said, the one day before is such a significant difference. And then actually making that conscious choice, even in that moment, where do I actually want to go? Who do I actually want to be is another layer. And so, embracing that. And you said something else, Adelaide, being kind to yourself, which I think a lot of particularly females who are actually having to consider, do I go back to work, don't I? And that guilt, it does creep through no matter what your choice is. There will be that element of guilt.
Yes. And we're bombarded by messages from society and marketers. So, I'll take my share of responsibility in that. But we are bombarded by different messages about you should do this and you should do that. You're not a good mom if you do that. You're a bad mom if you do that. There's a sentence that I've heard, and I actually said to one of my friends who was also a mom recently, is bad mothers never wonder if they're good mothers. That's, but it's true. It's true. If you're constantly wondering, am I being a good mom? I'm doing the best thing. Well, yes, you are. That just by trying, we're not always not everything's gonna work. We're all gonna mess up sometimes and do things like, oh, I should have done it the other way. But the intention is the main thing. What are you trying to achieve? Once again, we go back to the why. Why are you doing whatever you're doing? That's the key.
Can I touch on something? And it sort of links into what you've just said, but it comes back to you as a marketer. I guess at the end of the day, marketing actually serves traditionally a specific purpose. And that is, when it comes to business, it's sales, So selling. So then we actually start to, look at human behavior, and the actual messaging is specifically targeted to that vulnerable part of any human being to buy. How do you navigate through that?
It's incredibly hard. And I think that's one of the reasons where I work in specific industries. So I'm a B2B marketer. I work in the business side of things because I find that you're not exploiting vulnerabilities as much when you're playing in that space. Decisions are usually a bit more rational because there's not one person involved. Usually it's a multi-person approach and you talk to different people. So it sits better with my values. I actually don't think I would be able to work in B2C space, selling things that I know people don't necessarily need, especially in the current economic climate where I know that, we all know that people need to look a bit more at where they're spending and everything is tightening and it's harder. But also because everything is a bit doom and gloom. Like, honestly, sometimes you put the news on and it's a bit scary. When it's a bit doom and gloom, we're tempted to buy nice and shiny things to make ourselves feel better when really we shouldn't. And I think, marketers that play on this and pull these strings, that is not something I would be able to do. That would not sit well with my values. I understand that all businesses have a place and, some marketers do that and do it really well. But I think it's more the business more than the marketer then that maybe should reflect on, are we doing the right thing? What's our place in society? Are we just selling, literal crap just for, like, we know it's not sustainable. We know we need to consume less. We know we need to be better. We need to tighten our purses at the moment. Yet they will continue to push things again and again and again. And yeah, as a marketer, that is something that I really, really struggled with because, I sort of attach myself still to the more global marketing industry. And as part of that, I'm part of that world. And yes, it's not something that sits well with me. And it's something that I would like to effect on if I could.
I remember actually having a conversation with a client and they were very passionate about, and I'm going to say, the animal industry in respect to how animals are treated, particularly for food consumption. And they were wanting to actually share the messaging around, looking at ethical businesses. What was fascinating for me was actually their approach into how they were going to, I'm going to say, bring community together. And how they were doing that was by actually having, I'm going to say, a stuffed toy representation of that particular animal. And, I was saying to that particular person, so I'm just trying to follow through. You see, it's about sustainability and ethics. So I'm just curious, how is you selling a stuffed toy as part of this actual strategy aligning with you to what you have just said, right? We're actually selling something that is going to be landfill. There is no use for it, right?
We don't need it.
Yeah, they don't need it. And, they looked at me and went, I don't think I've ever thought about it like that. But it's so popular. And it's like,
it is.
How do we get to that stage where we don't actually see what we're saying and we're doing the very thing that's opposing it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's true like that. It's a very popular technique. And I actually have never thought about that exact point that way. So it's very interesting. I'd say a slight counter argument, I think it's to give ourselves grace and accepting that we're not going to be perfect. And that's, sometimes we're never going to get it 100%. And I think it's also important in businesses to understand that, yes, in an ideal world, everything we do will align. Sometimes there's things that might need some adjustment here and there, or accept that, something is going to be done once for learnings and then down the track, improvements. It's like, you can try and not eat meat, or you could try and just reduce this. And, you can try, maybe some people do not eat any meat, but they take their car every day because they don't have a choice. Or, none of us is perfect in that sense. But yeah, I think it's interesting that they haven't even considered it. I think, if you're doing it, but you considered it and you accepted it and you've thought about it, it's a very different process than just being like, oh, yes. Didn't think about that. Did not think that through.
Yeah. So, this is where I actually look at that story that we keep telling ourselves just becomes a pattern that we don't ever stop to think, as an observer of any situation. and I guess this is where I think you and I have so much synchronicity in that we're prepared to actually have a different conversation, that actually allows the opportunity just to slow down and consider, are we contributing to the existing scenario, or do we have another alternative that we can actually explore?
And work gets so busy that, I was talking about the cogs earlier. I think we're all guilty of that in one way or another. We're all getting in the cogs and we're turning and turning until someone puts the finger in and say, hey, stop and reflect. The cogs will keep turning because there's so much. I wouldn't say we're so busy, but it's more like we're so stimulated. There is so much stimulus everywhere, constantly, from life, from work, from social media. There's just noise around us that it's really hard to stop and reflect and think about that unless you make a very conscious effort.
As a marketer, Adelaide, can we actually touch on noise? Because I know that that's something that I, raise quite a lot, but you're sitting at a slightly different, maybe advantageous position, around noise. And when can it actually be a benefit rather than actually look at it, as the impediment to actually understand choice and who we are?
It's an interesting one because obviously from marketing, we benefit from noise. I mean, we're the one making the most noise, probably the noisiest of them all. That's, I probably have told my boss that we need to make more noise at some point or another. That is, it is hypocritical. It's a bit what it is. We do make noise. Finding the right noise, I think it's about quality over quantity. It's always running. I think noise is important because you wouldn't hear any messages that wasn't for noise. Like we're currently, you and me, making noise, producing noise that, so it's all around what is it that the noise is trying to achieve? Are we making noise just for noise? Are we making what is it that we're doing that can be beneficial? And it's the same in, I'd say, any marketing strategy in any business. It's don't try and be everywhere all the time. Don't try and be on all the channels. And just, what is it that you're doing? What's your why? What are you trying to say? And what's the best way to get that message through? So I think it's about moving from noise to message is probably the evolution.
I actually really love that because that sort of, it sits well with me because I think that is exactly what I tend to do. It's not actually about being noisy for the sake of being noisy, but for creating a space to share knowledge and also actually allow people to perhaps consider something else. So I love that you've actually shared that. Do you think that a lot of marketing people out there think about that? Is that a priority?
I don't think so. I think usually you get there either via experience and also by having a leadership that allows you to do that. Because, how many times have we heard leaders just say, we need to have a buzz, we need to generate buzz. There is nothing that is more noise than buzz, literally, that is not serving anything. So I think that's one thing. I think, the experience and the space for that. Sometimes it happens when you're so stretched for time and resources as well that you don't have a choice. My boss always used that word, ruthless prioritization. I think I hear that probably every day at the very minimum. And that's what it is, because when you have to ruthlessly prioritize what you're doing, there is no space for noise. You just don't have the bandwidth for it. Or if you decide to make noise, then nothing's going to work. I think, and that's something that, I care a lot about and that I'm actually thinking of getting out through, some sort of media, is getting to the core of marketing. There is so much noise, again, in marketing around, SEO is dead now, it's AI thing, and look at this new thing here and this new platform there. But at the end of the day, marketing is simple and boring. It literally is. It's simple and boring. Who are you talking to? What are you trying to get them to do? Why are you trying to make them do that? How is it going to change their life, their work? Like, what is it going to do for them? And what's the best way to get that through? And, it's not about the latest fancy things and I think we need to move away from that and just refocus. And that's how you kill the noise and you get back on message and on what is it that I'm sitting here to do today? What am I trying to achieve? How am I going to get there? Just sit and reflect and forget about the fancy tactics. Close LinkedIn, close Instagram, close TikTok, close all of those things that are just trying to push things to you. Just think about what you're sitting here to do.
I think in short, that comes down to FOMO, actually fearing what somebody else might actually be doing. And that's perhaps the essence of what a lot of marketing tries to give the messaging to. So it makes you keep everything that you've just said to close open and playing that chase game, right? Can I ask you something? You've worked across different continents. Do you think that there's a difference, based on maybe the way that marketing is actually done in France or in Spain or in Norway, which I think actually has a very different ethical framework, and that of Australia?
I think absolutely. I think, marketing is about the human behind it. So like what, that understanding of human psychology. And so, of course, different cultures are going to have different responses to things. They're not going to respond to the same messages. They're not going to tolerate the same things. When you think about France is very much known to react strongly to things. We riot and we go on strike and we burn things and we cut heads. That's roughly what we do, on a Sunday.
We don't do the heart anymore, right?
Yeah, it's been 200 years, but you never know. I wouldn't put it past France. But, there's that aspect to us. It's just like any decision that is pushed upon us, we, by default, don't like it. Then we might reflect, but our default reaction is no. We don't like change. So, of course, you're going to respond differently. And it's an old country, it's that old Europe, that old continent, where you compare to a country like Australia, which is still so new in its current form. That society, the Australian society in its current form is still very new, very developing. There's more appetite for change and growth and development than you would see in Europe, for example. And then if you look at Asia, for example, it's yet again completely different. The relationship to power structures, for example, are different. So yes, all of that impact. And then languages also, I strongly believe that languages impact the way people think and shape personalities and culture. So that, all of that put together, you really can't market to a country the same way you would to another. That just wouldn't work. If you go back to the human and to the why, the channels may change, but the message should still be fundamentally the same.
It's interesting because, we are actually living in a global world, particularly with online platforms. And so just listening to you share that allows me to reflect on how do things land when you're actually, talking to a community that might actually be within your own surrounds and with your actual understanding of your own culture for somebody who has not actually lived your life. And so, to your point, really understanding what it is that you want to actually share is more important than you actually trying to sell to somebody.
Yes.
Based on your own lens, right?
Absolutely. And it's something that we see a lot online, people seeing things through their own lens only. And we see that, let's say, I see that a lot. If you look at comments, people in America always assume that some English-speaking content is going to be based in America as well. And sometimes but that's not true. That's not how it works. So well, actually, we're in Australia. It works differently. But, things like that, because people just assume, even in Australia, based on state, we have the same thing. We're like, well, actually, that's not true. Well, I'm in Queensland, you're in New South Wales, we've got different things. Because people just assume that someone else's situation is going to be the same as theirs, that everyone is seeing the world through their own lens instead of stopping, reflecting and just taking the time to understand the other perspective.
Yeah. So, Adelaide, I guess one of the things for us, particularly on this program, is actually looking at what are some of the things that we can actually pay attention to that raises that level of consciousness, particularly, when we are communicating in the messaging that we want to send? What would you say to people?
I'd say there's two main angles. One, obviously, we've talked about, which is finding your why. Just stopping, reflecting, and understanding why you do, and not just in life, but it could be on little things as well. As I said, New Year's resolution. I want to exercise more. Okay, why? Why are you trying to do that, and what's the impact for you? Like for me, for example, is because I want to stay fit and strong to play with my boys as they grow and being that active. It can take different shape, but finding the why in decision that you make, small and big, that's definitely one. And the other one is a concept that you've touched on so many times, which is the react versus respond side of things. And I've heard that thing one that I really truly believe in, which is when you're confronted to a situation, your first thought is what the society basically has been putting into you. Your second one is what you are and what your values are. And I think that's it. It's that reaction is what's been pushed onto you. Your response is what you are. And that applies to so many things. Once again, big and small. It can be scrolling Instagram and seeing something that triggers you, and suddenly, you get all emotional, and just stopping and like, okay, why is that happening? And just pause and respond like, actually, that's not what I believe in, and just, taking that time. So as even in small daily things, I think that's very important to find that difference between that reacting and responding to things. You make business decisions is the same. You're confronted to a problem. You're going to have your first reaction, your first, very emotional about things. And it's like, okay, pause, let's reflect, let's see. And then you can work on your response.
Yeah. I think that I actually refer to that as actually, coming back to center. When you genuinely actually unearth what that why is, not at a surface level, but at a deep level. Yeah. You see things from a really different perspective. And then I think everything else sort of flows from that.
Yeah, and give yourself some grace. We're not always going to be perfect. We get tired. We get overwhelmed. We get all of this, and it's okay. I definitely don't always respond to my kids. I very often react because it's been a long day. There's been lots going on, and I'm tired, and they're tired, and same. Sometimes I've noticed that everyone's tired and becomes a mess, and and I feel like it's a bit like the situation in the world at the moment. I feel like everyone's got a bit tired and a bit emotional, and maybe we should all calm down a little, and pause. And someone's like, okay, you're tired, I'm tired. Let's just take some time and reset. I'm sorry, apologize, move on. Those kind of things, same. Could be used at a global level, just stop, apologize, and move on. It would be lovely if I could see more of that. But yeah, give yourself some grace. We're never going to be perfect. You just come back to alignment, reflect on what went wrong, try and do better the next day. And that's okay. It's, we've got time to fix. It's not about getting it right the first time. It's about acknowledging when something goes wrong and making a conscious effort to improve.
I love that. It doesn't really matter who you are, where you are, what you do, but just actually giving yourself the opportunity to be kind to yourself, right? That grace that you talk about. And then just to slow down and recognize what you have done more so than what you haven't done is so important, right?
It's a big thing. Just reflect on things okay, well, maybe I haven't achieved this, but, I have achieved that. That's something I do every year. I try and write at the beginning of the year where I would like to be by the end of the year. And then when I read that back and I reflect, it's oh, okay, maybe I haven't done that. But because throughout the year, I also write all my little achievements that may be completely unrelated. It's well, I haven't done that, but look at what else I've done. So, we can't do it all. And that's, we talked quickly about that success and redefining success. And, it's not going to look the same for everyone. We can't do it all. Just focus on what does that look like for you? What's your why? What's your definition of success? What are you going to put in place to get there?
So I'm going to tell you something that I actually, hold really dear to me. it actually has to do with you because you and I, have worked closely together. I look at how you actually hold me accountable, and you've done day one. And to me, that's a success.
I love because there's been some interesting conversations.
So many interesting conversations. But I love that because, values is actually not only very strong for me, but it is very strong for you. And, you actually asking me certain things actually keeps me, centered. It actually keeps me grounded. And it makes me stay on track. And I don't know that you recognize that as success. So I wanted to actually bring that, to the forefront so that the whole world can actually hear that. Because
making you stay on track is definitely something I would consider a success. Absolutely.
But you see what I mean? Like,
yeah.
I have got the confidence to actually say Adelaide, blah, and you can say no, and I go, okay, got it.
Yes, I have. Yeah. No, it's true. And I think that's a very valid point as well, is that sometimes we forget things that we do that, that the way we impact other people, and we just forget to reflect on that as well. It's, we're all by nature self-centered, like that's just human nature. And we forget to consider that as well. And yeah, it is definitely a success.
It is a success. And on that note, I guess people will be listening to this, with all sorts of, I guess, different backgrounds, but you've shared so much wisdom and insight. What would be one thing that you would want them to take away from listening to this particular episode?
I think it's, there's this thing about know yourself. And I think that's key. Just, know yourself in all ways. Know yourself, know where you are, where you want to be. Just, what are you trying to do? Forget about everyone else, not in a selfish way, but in that focus. Obviously, consider when you're trying to say what you want to achieve. I'm sure other people will come into equation, your family, your friends, everyone around you. Yeah, know yourself. And then everything else we talked about, the whys, the message, the giving yourself grace, all of that will come from there. But I think, taking that time is so important. And it's not something you need to do once. Don't think I've done that reflection once. Because we're constantly changing. We're constantly evolving. The world around us is changing and impacting us. We might go through life events that are drastically changing us as well. And we need to constantly do that exercise, constantly reflect, constantly think about what it is we're trying to achieve. We only have such a short time on this earth. Life is short, and it can be even shorter than we think it's going to be. We never know when things are going to end at the end of the day. Life is short. What it is that I'm trying to do, just make it count.
So, we started with a whole lot of different discussions, but one thing that I guess we circled around was messaging, boundaries, success. And I think if I can actually just almost come back to center around that, success in so many ways is actually knowing yourself.
Absolutely. Because then you know what you stand for. Your definition of success is very dependent on who you are. So know yourself and make it count, I guess, would be the two key messages.
Well, Adelaide, as always, your actual presence, but your grounded approach, particularly when it comes to messaging and marketing and the way that we actually connect, I love it. It certainly has been, grounding for me. It's actually allowed me to seriously stand where I am today. So I'm very grateful for that.
And I'm grateful for the opportunity of that. I think you were client number 2 for me. You were my second ever client. And I think I'm very proud of that relationship that we've built throughout all those years.
Yeah, well, thank you. And I hope the world actually gets to see you for exactly who you are and those that are actually listening from a marketing lens, take on board what, Adelaide has actually shared today, because that depth of actual understanding and the impact and the value proposition actually genuinely creates a much bigger ripple in the world, and you'll find that you're actually going to be heard very differently.
Absolutely. And don't think you're too small to have an impact. Everyone can have an impact at their own scale and impact bigger things. It's that ripple effect that you talk about so often, Cathy.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Adelaide. We're going to wrap up here. At the end of the episode, when this actually comes to air, you will actually be able to reach out to Adelaide. Please make sure that you do. You won't be disappointed. Thank you, Adelaide.
Thanks, Cathy.
This was Let's Pay Attention, Hacking Consciousness. Stay awake, lead with heart, be bold enough to listen deeply. I'm Cathy Dimarchos. Until next time, be the impact.